think about this. If we were saying that the Romans are racist, well, one of the main reasons for people to be racist is regarding to religion. People usually do not like that other people have a different religion that they do. So imagine the Romans that are going to be following the religion of Catholicism, with this idea of Paul's, in which Christ is the God, the Son of God, and is also a God, and the barbarians, or the so-called barbarians, are going to be believing that Christ was a lesser God, that the actual only God was the Father. So this is also a great division between the Foederati, the barbarians, and the actual Romans, and perhaps was also part of the of all the racism that the Romans exercised over the Foederati. But by the 6th century, the Visigoths are going to decide to stop following Arianism, and they're going to become Catholics too. And they were actually the last kingdoms that remained Arian, because Clovis the First with the Franks, they became Catholic. So the Visigoths were the last kingdoms that were Arian, and by the 6th century they are going to become Catholic. But also by the 6th century, by the end of the 6th century, or rather in the middle of the second half of the 6th century, Mohammed is going to be born. So we are going to have the birth of another religion. And by the 7th century, what we are going to have is Catholicism and Islam. And this is going to be the new great fight of these times, no longer between Arians and Catholics, but between Catholics and Muslims. So also we can see how the organization, in this idea of studying the processes that went by, we can also see how organization was changed throughout this period. So, for example, if we start over here, we can see that by the 4th century, we have first one way of organization. First we had one way of organization, that is the Roman Empire itself, like the single Roman Empire, and by the end of the 4th century, we're going to have both the Western Empire and the Eastern Empire. So these are the two ways of organization that we're going to be seeing by the 4th century, and that are going to be transformed. First the Roman Empire, and by the end of the century, both the Western and the Eastern Roman Empire. And this Roman Empire is going to be transformed. In the 5th century, the Western Roman Empire is going to end. So we're going to go from this way of organization over here to this way of organization, in which we only have the Eastern Empire and we have all the barbaric kingdoms. That, remember that this is also one of these transformations. The Foederati, that are these peoples paying the military services for Rome, are going to become the kingdoms. So they are going to overthrow the Romans in their own territory. And then this is going to be transformed into this, that yes, at least the first two in this list are barbaric kingdoms, but well, we rather see them in this case as peoples in their own right, because remember that by this time they were the only the only kingdoms that remained after all this division. I can clearly see a difference between all these peoples, all these divisions into barbaric kingdoms, and over here that they become actually centralized kingdoms. I wouldn't call them barbaric kingdoms anymore over here. And also there is nothing to still be called Roman, so perhaps they are only the after Roman kingdoms or something like that. That would be less racist. And so we're going to have basically these two kingdoms, the Visigoths, or the Goths rather. Remember that they're going to be ruling over this territory in red and also this territory in pink, and the Franks that are going to be ruling all around this brownish territory. And we're also going to have, by the end of this century, the Byzantine Empire. So we're going from the Eastern Empire and the barbaric kingdoms. And of course, we also have, well, yes, this is the Eastern Empire that is going to become the Byzantine Empire and the barbaric kingdoms. And then those barbaric kingdoms are going to stop existing. All this great variety of kingdoms are going to cease, and we're only going to have the Goths rather than the Visigoths, the Goths and the Franks, and then the former Eastern Empire is now the Byzantine Empire. And by the 7th century, well, we are not going to have the Visigoths anymore, nor the Goths anymore. The only thing that is going to be remaining is the Franks, the Byzantine Empire, and the Caliphate. And the Caliphate is going to be this Islamic state that is going to be following the teachings of Muhammad. And that is why Jacques Legoff, that was a historian from the school of Marc Bloch, used to call these two centuries, yes, from the 5th to the 7th century, the settlement of the barbarians, because this is more or less a broader process in which what we are going to be seeing is how these foederati that used to live here are going to be settling around the former Roman Empire, and finally are going to be established as the feudal kingdoms that we are going to study in the second half of the Middle Ages. So yes, more or less it was this time which took this broader process in which these foederati are going to be forming the new feudal kingdoms for the second half of the Middle Ages, is going to take at least this 2 to 3 centuries, according to Legoff, and I think that we can all agree on that. So as I was telling you, this century is really easy, because if we were saying that perhaps the 6th century was the century of the Franks, but we also had the Byzantine Empire and all, in the 7th century it is really clear that it is the century of Islam. Sorry about that. And the century of Islam is going to start. We said that the last century ends in 610, because it is going to be when Muhammad is going to start spreading the teachings of Islam. But also at least he was born by the 570. So it took him 40 years to start spreading Islam. He starts spreading Islam in 610. And according to him, he's going to be receiving the word of God by the Archangel Gabriel by 610. And then he's going to take control of Medina in 623. Why? Because he's going to go away from his own city of birth, that is La Mecca, because he's going to start having problems with the other tribes and with his own tribe because of his followers. So he's going to move to Medina, and he's going to take control of that city. He's going to be founding the Islamic State, and from there Islam is just going to be spreading. So as you can see here, this is basically the century over here. Islam starts more or less over here in La Mecca, then it is moved towards Medina, and in Medina it becomes a state, and then it conquers back La Mecca, and they're going to be conquering all this part of Arabia, and this darker color is going to be the territories that Muhammad himself is going to be conquering. And Muhammad is going to die in 632. And from there, 4 more caliphs that are going to be the leaders of the Islamic State are going to be conquering this kind of pink territory over here, all the way to 661. And in 661 we have the end of the first fall of 4 caliphates, and it begins something called the Umayyad Caliphate, and you're going to study a bit of that by your own. And they're going to be conquering starting in 661, all these yellow territories. So all of this is going to be the spread of Islam. And I am proposing that the century is ending by 711, when the Muslims enter Spain. It is going to take them longer to conquer all Spain, but the first contact, the first place, when moment where they when they cross and start defeating the Visigoths, with Don Rodrigo being the king, is going to be in 711. But we're going to see that later. So that is basically the century, the spread of Islam from this part over here that was conquered by Muhammad, this part over here that was conquered by the four following caliphs, and finally the Umayyads that are going to be getting all the way into Spain and are going to finish with the Visigoths. They are going to defeat and disappear the Visigoths. Well, almost everything, only this small territory over here is going to remain, and they're going to be fighting back from that moment on, starting with this territory. But that is going to take 800 years, so we have time to study that process. But this is basically the century. So the activity for today, as we already have our card of the 5th century, and now we have our card of the 6th century, your activity is to fill down the card for the 7th century. And finally, we have a century that actually lasts 100 years, right? If it is going to start in 610 and it is going to end in 711, then it is more or less 100 years. So in order for you to be able to complete this information over here, because this is basically the century, but in order for you to help yourselves in being able to fill our card of the 7th century, I am going to ask you to use your page 379 in your book and 380. So let me write it here: 379 and 380. And over here you're going to find information about these two processes, the one in pink and the one of yellow, these two big expansions of Islam, following the expansion that Muhammad himself promoted. So that would be it for today. Thank you very much, and I'll be answering all of your questions through Zoom, as you already know.